Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the And Both podcast. My guest is Monique Hutcherson Benoit. She's a dynamic leader in the consumer products industry and a passionate advocate for equity and inclusion. With a career marked by energy and enthusiasm, Monique has excelled in retail buying at Target Corporation and Anthropologie. As a team lead for beauty channel at the Emerson Group, she worked with a diverse array of health and wellness brands. She later ventured into entrepreneurship, offering her expertise as a retail go-to-market strategy consultant to help beauty brands refine their narratives and successfully engage with retail partners. Currently, as a senior merchant at Ulta Beauty, she spearheads BIPOC brand development, and Monique is also a proud mom to 4 daughters, ages 13, 9, 7, and 5. This week's episode I love because when you have two moms of larger families on, there's kind of an interesting shorthand that happens, and I just love the bouncing off of ideas when you're significantly outnumbered by the people that you made or that are a part of your life under the ages of you. Anyways, Monique I love talking to her because she's someone who really truly embraces the pivot and doesn't get stuck in where I am now is where I always have to be. And I think that that's a really important message for people to hear over and over again. And, a pivot to her and a pivot to me and a pivot to you may be completely different things, can be big, can be small. But I love that she started in one completely different track of chemical engineering and is now advising beauty brands. And that just goes to show the power of embracing your strengths and staying curious and always working towards whatever that next goal is. And hilariously enough, this episode is being released in the beginning of January, but it was recorded in October. And I chuckled as I was listening back to it because we were talking about, the school year changes and kids having runny noses. And it just sort of feels like what used to have a seasonal, feel to it now just sort of seems to be in all the school season all the time because we are all, I think a lot of us are probably smack dab in the middle of winter, cold, and things like that if you are listening to this episode as it is released. So enjoy this week's episode, and you are always welcome to join us in the And Both community. There's some information to follow on that, and here's Monique. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. All right. Welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Monique Benoit. And Monique, welcome. I'm pumped to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I think, we're in that phase of the school year. I'm going to want you to get into all of your story and details, but we're both in that phase of having 4 kids and someone has always got a runny nose or school is closed or whatever. So it kind of feels like October is this month of will it end?
Yeah. And it just started. We're barely a month and a half into the school year. And it's that reminder of this is what the school year brings. It's different. It's tough. It's a lot, but it's motherhood.
Yeah. It's I all summer, and I live in the worst reality with this is I'm when the kids go back into school, and I've had kids for a long time now, and I still tell myself this. No. It's not
so
true.
Funny, right? Because summer is a different type of busy, and I don't know. I feel like I do still prefer the school year. I think I still prefer the school year because it's still more consistent than summer, at least because summer camps, it's each kid might be in a different camp, and then this week the camp doesn't offer extended hours, but then the next day they do, and there's the summer holiday. So I feel like I still prefer the school year. I don't know. Maybe not.
Well, in those extended camp days, it's like, actually, we don't take payment via Visa or MasterCard. It's actually like a
Cash
lobe of your
only
liver.
or
Yeah.
like sometimes it's like, you need me to pay cash? Like,
Yeah.
and then I start doing the math. Like, I've got 4 kids. So like 4 times whatever it is, that's a lot of cash. But it's, it's a wonder.
Oh, it's a journey. It is a journey. So tell everybody about you, because I am totally fascinated and I feel like you and I could be on here for like 8 hours because I have so many questions. But tell people all about you.
Yeah. So as you shared, my name is Monique Benoit. I am a chemical engineer turned retail strategist. I work for Ulta Beauty full time, managing strategy for the diverse owned businesses. So that includes their accelerator program, which helps 8 early stage diverse owned brands get ready for retail. And it also includes supporting our current diverse owned businesses. So it's amazing for me to be able to do something full time, and get paid for something that I love that's tied to passion work, which is, creating equity. And then outside of work, I am a mom to 4 girls. They are 13, 9, 7, and 5. I'm divorced. So I've kind of lived life as, I also joke and I say I have 2 baby daddies, which it's not a joke, it's true. So my oldest daughter has a different dad. So I've kind of done everything from came into motherhood as a single mom, got married and had a blended family, had 3 more kids with my ex-husband, and then, divorced and experiencing what life is like again as a mom of 4, not having any more children, regardless of whoever I meet. This is it for me. So really just learning how to live life and do the best that I can, co-parenting with my girls' dads and raising these girls and doing all the other things that life requires.
That is a busy, it's such a, there's so much, like, there's so many layers to, I mean, just in trying to sort out like schedules and trying to sort out life and trying to sort out like everything external to you. That's like, that's a lot. And then on the back end of it, you've also had like a million things happen along the way, right? Like, so chemical engineering, for anyone who is not a chemical engineer, is not simple.
It's not. It's not.
It's hard.
It's really hard. And I joke, I say, you know what? Nobody asks you what your GPA is when you say you have a degree in chemical engineering. And I went to the University of Michigan too, which is a tough school. So that's like, the funny thing is people are like, wow, you must be smart. And I'm like, I guess so. I graduated. And then along the way, I did get my MBA from Carnegie Mellon University, which is what allowed me to transition careers. So I know many folks will leverage an MBA to kind of switch careers. So I had done my engineering thing for a little bit, moved out of technical sales and engineering into healthcare sales. But then the MBA allowed me to shift into retail, which was awesome because I was like an 8 college graduate. So that core millennial who was like, oh, shoot, like everything crashed when I graduated from college. I loved the idea of blogging, started a blog back in the day in like 2008, talking about hair and lifestyle, but then became a mom fairly early on. So I was expecting with my oldest daughter when I was 24. And so at the time I had my blog and I was like, oh, maybe I should do this full time. But then I was like, girl, you need healthcare. You need benefits. You're about to have a child. You have a dependent. So I couldn't do that. But I say that to say I always loved retail. I think being in the engineering field, working around, I say I was a minority on every front, gender, age, race, all of the above. I realized how much I loved the creative side of things. And so I ended up getting a part-time job working in retail. And that was what I loved. I loved being around beautiful things. I loved working with people who wanted to talk fashion and style. And I feel very blessed and grateful that I was able to ultimately find a career path there after getting my MBA. So, things tend to work out for the most part, more or less. It just takes a while sometimes.
Why did you go into chemical engineering to begin with? Like, of all of the phone book of majors, that they give you, and they're like, astronaut and like whatever, superhero, all of these things. You're like, let me narrow it in on chemical engineering.
So I grew up, I would say, like upper middle class. So I was fairly privileged. And so I knew very early on that, like, if I want to live the same lifestyle as what my parents provided, I need to make a certain amount of money. And so I was going through the careers, like, did I want to be an attorney? Did I want to be a doctor? Did I want to, like all of the careers that I was like, make money. And then I really loved chemistry and math in high school. And so I just kind of put those two together and was like, chemical engineering. I didn't shadow or talk to any chemical engineers, because if I did, I probably would have been like, never mind. Because my senior year of college, I actually said like, oh, I remember calling my mom and I was like, I don't want to be an engineer. I hate this. I had interned at like a cement company, like had like grabbing samples of cement dust and getting it spilled all over me, safety glasses, like steel toe boots, hard hat, all the full thing. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And my mom was like, you have 12 credits left. You're going to be a chemical engineer. And of course, I hated her for saying that, but it makes total sense looking back. Mm-hmm. But that's why I did chemical engineering. It was like chemistry, math. I'll make a decent amount of money. But as I matriculated through, I spent like my first 3 years of my career as an engineer, like doing real engineering work. I worked for a water company, a water treatment company. So I sold chemicals to power plants and refineries. So again, steel toe boots, flame retardant jumpsuit.
Beauty.
Not Ulta Beauty. No, like no makeup. Okay. That wouldn't have made sense. I don't think I could even wear earrings. But I just remember thinking like, I could get called in because I was technical sales. So like if the water pump stops working, they're going to call me to be like, what's going on? Our chemicals treated for this water aren't working appropriately. And when I was expecting with my oldest, I just thought, how do women do this? And then when I looked at career progression and promotion, I was basically going to have to move to the middle of nowhere, which is where many manufacturing plants are located, in order to be promoted. And I'd seen other women, the handful of women of color and just, white women who had done that. And I just thought, I'm a single mom. I don't know if that's the life that I want to live. I don't know if that's the life I want for my daughter. I don't know if that's the life that I want for me. And so there are a lot of things kind of converging that made me think, okay, I did this chemical engineering thing, but I don't think this is going to help me achieve the life that I want. And this is at 24. So what do we know at 24? Like, I just knew like, not this.
Yeah.
So that's when I ended up transitioning into healthcare sales. So I read one of those career books talking about transitioning. I'd actually applied to some jobs in retail also, but that's when I learned that like, oh, entry-level retail jobs make half of what engineers make. So good job for studying engineering, but this transition to retail, if you need to support a family, is not going to happen. So that's when I went into healthcare sales, excuse me. That's when I went into healthcare sales and sold like technology tools to hospitals and health systems as they were switching from physical paper records, because we did still have that back in the early 2000s, into electronic medical records. So we had tools that were helping them to like look at dashboards, to look at doctor performances and have a little more data-driven, tech-driven, recommendations behind those things.
I love that. I think too, like so much of what happens when you're a kid and you're thinking about going into school is like your end goal is here. And it's like, all right, what are all the avenues that I can pursue to get there? And then you get there and you're like, hold on a second. Like my dad was a chemical engineer, which is why when I read this on the thing, I was like, how does chemical engineering go to Ulta Beauty? Because he worked at refineries. And like, there's not, like, you're in the middle of nowhere and everything's disgusting. So that's a question that, like you turn the paper sideways and you're like, interesting. Let us connect the dots here. But I love that it's not, I think that sometimes what happens, especially now because college is so expensive and it's so like, there's so much identity tied to it, is that it sounds like yours was like a means to an end versus like you don't wake up in the morning like in a cold sweat because you're not practicing as a chemical engineer, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I did the thing, I got the background and all of that, and I can use this massive skill set, toolbox, whatever, to pivot into something that's going to work for me.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for it because it's like, well, you're smart. And it's like, yeah, I can figure out a lot of things. And it's funny because I think on the retail side of things, the creative part or the like, do you have the eye? It's almost like if you've ever watched or any of your listeners have watched The Devil Wears Prada, it's very much giving that Miranda vibe where it's like, well, I like this or I don't like it. And there's not necessarily a reason. It's just like, no, that's not it. So it's the art. We always joke in retail and say there's an art and a science. So I think the funny thing is when I went to retail, it was more so like, is she going to understand the art? Like, does she have the eye? But I feel like that's one of those things, like you either get it or you don't. If you're an aesthetics girl or an aesthetics person, you either understand like, oh, this is the look that we're going for. This is the specific aesthetic of this brand. And I know how to cater as a buyer. That was like my job for the various retailers that I worked for. You kind of get to curate an assortment and pick brands and select items to kind of fit that aesthetic. So that was more so the harder part. Like, is she going to get it? Because that is hard to teach. You just have to be able to look and see like this fits, this doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that, that's the piece, right? It's like, can you make the switch? It's sort of like not everyone, there aren't 5 million Mirandas walking around. There's like one. And I mean, in that movie, part of it is a great thing. So when you're making this transition into retail and into more of the Ulta side of life, like how does that line up with when your other kids were born?
Yeah. So I went back to business school with a 2-year-old. So it's funny, when I was actually expecting my oldest, I was preparing to apply to business school. And because again, my parents kind of instilled in me prestige matters, go to a good school. I was applying to go to like the Harvards, the Whartons. I had gotten accepted into a pre-MBA program that was essentially prepping me to go to a top school. So I find out I'm pregnant in like December. I was studying for the GMAT, which is the test you have to take to get an MBA, and had the date on the calendar in January. I'm looking at things and I'm like, no way I'm going to be able to go to business school with an infant. She was due in July. I'm like, no way. So I should just cancel the GMAT. Well, I go to cancel the GMAT and they're like, you're less than a month out. You can't cancel. You're not going to get your money back. So I'm like, of course I can't cancel. So I'm like, you know what? I've studied, I'm done with this. I'm going to go to New York. So I remember I had a GMAT test on Monday. I go to New York City because I'm still 24. And I party with some friends that night. No drinking, but I still have a good time hanging out.
Right.
And then I take the test and I scored better than I had ever done on any practice test. And I was like, wow, with this score, I can get into a top business school. Like, I was just like, okay, well, good to have it in my back pocket. So fast forward, I end up moving to Virginia when I essentially had my oldest daughter, because my mom and dad have always been super supportive of me. So grateful for them to have the flexibility to be able to support me. I moved to Virginia because I'm like, great, you guys can help me. My mom was my childcare, which helped a lot with costs. And then a year into moving to Virginia, my dad gets a job in Pittsburgh and he's like, we're moving to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, Dad, I moved here because you guys are here. What does that mean? So my mom's like, we're going to do one more year out here in Virginia, and then we'll move to Pittsburgh like a year later. So I had like 2 years essentially to figure out what to do. So in that time, I'm applying to jobs full time. My dad ends up sitting next to a woman on an airplane. My dad is super friendly. We're sorority sisters. She ends up asking about, talking to my dad about things. He's always doting on me. So he's talking about his amazing daughter. And she's like, your daughter sounds like a fantastic candidate for our MBA program. She should consider applying. And she should consider applying through the consortium, which will essentially give me like a full ride scholarship. And so I was like, Dad, this is like October. So I'm like, Dad, I have not done any essays. Like, this is a top school. And he's like, well, you figure it out. So I like rush, thankfully had the GMAT, the good score, apply. Fast forward, I applied to Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, got accepted and got full rides to both schools.
That's awesome.
So at that time, it was like, okay, I can move to Pittsburgh. My parents will be there. They can support me with my daughter. And I can get my MBA. Like, it's all gonna, the things that I wanted from when I was expecting, it's gonna work out. Like, look at God. So I get to business school and I'm like, okay, business school can be a great place for me to like find my husband. So I'm like, I literally go in there saying like, I'm going to get my MBA and my MRS, like my missus, I'm going to get both. I was really like, oh, I'm about to get both. And so I did end up, you set your intention, manifest, and let's say it happened. So I ended up meeting my ex-husband in business school. We met. He was the same year as me, was also in the same group where we got a scholarship. We ended up meeting, got married within like a year and a half of being in business school. So we got married in like December of our second year of B school. And then me being the person that I am, being on a timeline, understanding strategy, I was like, look, I said to him, I was like, look, this is how I see things. I already know what it's like to be a mom. I want to have a couple more kids. At the time, I thought I wanted to have 2 more kids. The last one was a surprise. And so I was like, I know I want to have 2 more kids. The way that I see it, if I can have my next kid before or right around the time that I start my job full time, I can still get paid for maternity leave, but I'll also still be on track with the rest of my peers because it's like I already took 2 years off for business school. I take like 8 weeks off for maternity leave and then I jump back at it. It's like I don't lose any steam career-wise because I was very focused on like, at the time when I got my MBA, I was very keen on wanting to be like a C-level officer. I felt like I had the skill set for it. I had the mannerisms, the politics for it. And that was my goal. So I didn't want to lose any steam professionally. And he was like, that sounds crazy. But like, if you want to do it, like, okay. So I got married in December. I think I found out I was expecting a little bit before the wedding and had my second oldest daughter in July of 2015. So that would have been like, I had started work at Target at the time, 1 week before she was born. And it just like, I'm telling you, things work out like the way the insurance plan was. She was like right at the deadline where I still could get her on my school insurance, but then I also was able to get maternity leave for Target. So I like worked, was able to collect a little bit of maternity leave. Granted, I took like 7 weeks, but I was 28. So, I mean, it's like I was young. I mean, and thankfully, all of my pregnancies were really fairly easy. Like I recovered pretty quickly. So me returning back to work when my child was just 8 weeks old or 7 weeks old was like, I was ready for it. So I had her then, and then had my next, they were like, my next 2 were basically 2 years apart. So it was like 2 years after, 2 years after. All of my children from my marriage were born in Minnesota while I was at Target, which was a really great company supporting working moms. So, I mean, I didn't take a ton of maternity leave, but I didn't want to take more time off. I was kind of like, 8 weeks is enough. I want to get back to work. I miss it. And thankfully had like daycares lined up so they could just go.
I love that. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot on the show is like this idea of like an ideal maternity leave time, because you bring up a really good point is that some people are, so I'm Canadian. And so when I was growing up, I moved here to the US in high school, but it's this idea of like a long maternity leave. So it's a year long and all of that stuff. And I think that there's definitely people that are like, yes, that is what maternity leave is. And then you come here and there's like nothing, right? It's like choose your own adventure in the worst way possible. Like it's some sort of like, I don't really watch Game of Thrones, but it's like Hunger Games, choose your own adventure. And like, you don't find out for 20 years if you screwed it up because, it's like all of it. No good ending. But I think that one of the things that people don't always talk about is that if you don't want to be out for a year, that's okay too. And I
Yeah.
think that like what happens a lot of times is people are like, oh yeah, a year or 6 months or 12 weeks or whatever. And like, there's all sorts of layers that get piled onto that. Like if you have a premature delivery and your kid is in the NICU, you're going to need longer time for all that. But like in your instance where things are relatively like smooth, I mean,
Yeah.
you have a human being emerging from your body in one way, shape, or form.
Right. As smooth
like,
as that goes, it still was like, whoa, every time. Every time it's like, I can't believe that I just did this.
Yeah.
What?
Every time it's like, huh? Who penciled this thing in? This is not what I was expecting. But also too, like that idea of like, okay, so this went relatively smoothly. I don't want to be out for this amount of time. And that's okay too. And I think that a lot of times that's where like you get this like feedback, for lack of a more appropriate or less appropriate term to put on a podcast. But you get this feedback from people. It's like 8 weeks is just not enough. And like in your instance, you're like, I'm ready to go. Like I was like ready. Heal well. I'm ready to go do that. So it's different.
I feel like it's different for everyone. And I mean, I think a lot of it too, money was definitely a driver because we were still a 2-income household. And so I also knew that like realistically, if I stop working, I'm going to have to, the kids were on my insurance. So we're going to have to pay into insurance and I'm not getting paid. And so it was like, I'm good. I can go back to work. Like, I'm excited to get back. I've always loved what I've done. And I mean, if I had more money or if I didn't have to go back, would I have taken a little more time off? Perhaps. I still don't think it would have been like another month though. It might have been like another 2 weeks maybe, just so I could like almost like have the kid in childcare and just have like time to myself. That's what I would probably have done. Like, send the kid away and then I'm going to be home by myself just doing the things that I want to do for myself because as a mom, it's very rare that I get time to myself. So,
yeah. I ran into this at the end of my full-time work before I had my first child. I don't know if I've ever told this story. So I worked as an inpatient therapist and my due date was February, like middle of February. And I had talked to my boss, I'm going to go out. This is my due date or whatever. And they say, okay, well, when are you going to go out? And my boss, like my due date was a Saturday. And my boss was like, so you'll be here till Friday. And I was like, I'm not entirely sure that that's going to happen. And she's like, well, I worked all the way up until I went in. Like she worked a full day and then went into labor and went into the hospital that night and had a baby. And I was like, I don't love that journey for me.
Everybody isn't you.
Yeah. I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to give you an award, but like I don't have one in my back pocket. And I remember like the Friday before that, so there was one whole week, I walked into her office because I was transferring grown adults, like getting people out of bed. And you're doing stuff where you help people in the bathroom and I was stuck. Like I literally got stuck because I had this baby inside of me that made like the dimensions of myself no longer fit with the structure I had to occupy. And I remember I walked into her office on that Friday and I was like, I'm all done. And she was like, but you still have another week. And I was like, I am out of smiles and I'm done now. She's like, well, what are you going to do for a week? And I was like, not a damn thing.
Period.
I laid on the couch, I put my feet up. I you fold the things and all that. And also, the other part, too, is she was like, well, your maternity leave is going to get cut short. And in my head, I was like, I'm not coming back from this thing because I'm not coming back to do this. Like the least understanding person when I was pregnant was not going to be the most understanding person when I had a new baby.
Oof, that's a word.
Yeah.
And sometimes you think because my manager's a woman with kids, she's going to empathize. She's going to get it. But not always true. Not always the case. Like I've had some amazing managers that were men that were very empathetic. I've had managers that were poor that were men and women, both with kids. So it's just luck of the draw.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's that recognition piece of knowing what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you and being able to say it out loud. to the person who's like, no, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah. Good
like,
for you for being able to, for being confident and bold enough to be like, I'm good. Like, say what you want, but I'm out.
Yeah. Right. Also, like, yeah, being 39 weeks pregnant really helps you like narrow in on the stuff that you have time for.
What's
right?
important?
It's like, yeah, I had no political like gas in my tank at the end of that. I was like, I shouldn't be in public. This is really, it's a service to the general world. Like, if I have one more person try and like bless me or like try and like tell me what my life is going to be like or like, all of that, I was like, I need to go hide in my home.
Yeah.
And it's not like I didn't have enough leave to cover that on that back end, but it was at that time I was like, I just can't. I can't anymore.
Yeah.
And it's all individual. So in one of the things I read that you had written was that you wanted to be the girl boss and the homemaker until you realized, oh, actually, no. So tell me about that. Like, was there an event or was there sort of a long, slow burn on transitioning that way?
So Sheryl Sandberg wrote Lean In around the time, I think it was published the year or a year after I went to business school. So I didn't add that part. So I read Lean In cover to cover. And I said to myself, okay, I can do this. Like, I took that book and I was like, Sheryl said I need to lean in. I'm going to lean in. So I was like, okay, I think I need to, have a partner or what have you to, help with some of these things. But I just thought, oh, like this can happen. I don't think I realized the importance of the type of partner that you have to be able to support you if you desire career. Also knowing my ex-husband was also someone who desired career. Like, you don't go to get your MBA from a top school to sit at senior level management. I mean, like, I'm still at a senior manager title, which is fine for me right now. But you typically aspire to be a boss. Like, that's normally what my peers in business school were. So what I realized was, as I was going throughout my career, first, it was a matter of, for sure, having the right manager to support me as a mom, to provide me with the flexibility that was needed for me to be able to get all of the things done with the time that I had allotted. But I also realized that there was this whole other piece of life that was like, who does the cooking, who cleans clothes, who washes clothes. And then when life happens, if someone gets laid off, I had a child that was in the pediatric intensive care unit with viral and bacterial pneumonia for a week.
Oh, wow.
Where it was like, we thought she wasn't going to make it. And so when those kinds of life things started happening, that's when I realized, oh, this book didn't cover any of that. Like, this book was like fairy tale, perfect scenario. Like, nothing bad happens. But that's not reality. In reality, people lose jobs. In reality, there are bad bosses. Kids get sick. There's a limit to flexibility where, especially once I had 4 kids, it was just like, I need help. I was in Minnesota for work. My ex had more of a remote job where he could work from anywhere, but we were not near family. And so it was like, how do I support my children when there are only so many hours in a day? I want them to be able to be in activities or do the things that are important to them. But then there's also just like basic household chores that need to happen. And then I'd like to have a life too. Like, I'm still a woman. I'm still a friend, someone with personal desires and hobbies. And so I think around the time when I had my 4th daughter, that was when I realized, number one, that I didn't think the marriage was going to, we had been struggling for a little bit, like probably around when we had our second our second daughter, so my third daughter. But then after having the fourth, I was like, okay, we need a different set of support system. I need to be closer to friends. I need to be closer to family because I have not found community here. And that is a critical piece to, I felt like, happiness and just my ability to do life. And I was like, I was so well positioned professionally at the time at Target. I mean, while I was on maternity leave, this is me still being the girl boss. I had interviewed for director positions while I was on maternity leave because I had a friend in HR. He's like, hey, Mo, I know you're on maternity leave, so please don't hate me for this, but there's a role that opened up. I know what your goals are. And I was like, thank you so much for reaching out. I will absolutely be there. Like, I will come into the office. I will interview. I found some, had a friend watch my youngest while I went in for the interview. I ended up not getting the role. But while I was on that maternity leave, I decided to apply to jobs. And I was like, again, I'm a spiritual person. So I was like, okay, God, I had my youngest June 14th. I said, God, I need to receive a job offer by Labor Day. And if I get a job offer by Labor Day, because I still had 3 other kids that were in school. So I was like, I'm not trying to mess up their school that much. So I was like, if I can get a job offer by Labor Day, I'm going to move. I moved without my husband. I was like, I'm going to move with my girls to wherever the job is. And that's going to be that. And I received a job offer from Anthropology on August 22nd. And I was like, oh, that's it. All right, I'm moving. And Philly was like, I was like, let's go. And Philly was like home for me. Like, that was where I'd spent my formative years, 6th grade through 12th grade. I was there right after college. So I had a lot of childhood friends there. And so I knew that I would have community in that sense. I ended up making another move, which if you want to get to that, we can later on, because I realized friends are not the same as your mom, at least in my case, my mom. Because again, as I shared earlier, my mom has always been super helpful, kind of like whatever you need, I will do what I can. But I say I was in Philly for a time and it was amazing because I was able to be a bridesmaid, go to the bridal showers, all of those different fun events, and in a way that was very cost effective because everybody was like Philly, DC, New York. And so I could very easily hop around and be there for those life events for some of my friends who are very near and dear to me. And I should also add this, throughout everything that I experienced through my marriage, school, all of that, I've always had a very close group of girlfriends who have just been a consistent thread throughout. We might not talk always as frequently as we once did, but it's like they were there for me. And so I feel like that female friendship also was just really important and really crucial to support me through some of those hard times.
Mm-hmm. And are those people that had kids that were similar-ish age to you? Did they have kids at all?
Most of my friends started a lot later than me because most of my friends were similar to me in that they were also girl bossing. So unlike me, my friends were like, you're crazy for having kids at this age. Like, do your career. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And it's funny because now that we're, that was when we were 24. And now that we're like 38, 39, 40, some of those friends who desire motherhood are like, I don't know if that's going to happen for me. And I thought you were crazy. But now I see why you did it, because had I done this earlier, maybe I would have had a kid. And I don't know if that's going to be there for me. Or other friends are still like, no, you're still crazy. You're still crazy. And then, some that are in between. So, but it's interesting how life kind of causes you to reflect on things and see things differently. But none of those friends actually had children of their own. They were just, strong, independent women, solid careers, knew what we each desired and deserved, and knew when those things may or may not be serving us anymore.
And I like that. I mean, you never know, like the cards that you get dealt in terms of like friendship and stuff like that. But I wonder if, because those friends did not have children, so what happens, when you have kids is you get you get lobbed into the mom umbrella, like you're under that. And that's like, that becomes so much of the way that people see you and the lens that they view all of your decisions and choices. But if you have these friends who are really driven in that lane that you are also driven in, but not in the motherhood lane, like if they helped to remind you of who you were outside of motherhood, because they can't relate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like they would be like, you can figure this motherhood stuff out. Cause I'd be like, look, like, when talking about my ex, like, you guys don't understand how much stuff happens. Because my ex-husband was someone who did help out around the house. He wasn't the man who didn't do anything. I was doing all of the chores. He was helpful. And so I was like, I don't think you all understand. I have, at the time when I was in Philly, my youngest was 3 months. I had a 2.5-year-old. I had a 4-year-old, and I had an 8-year-old. And I was like, you guys want me to move to a city with just me, with kids those ages? And they're like, yeah. And you are absolutely right, because I was like, that is insanity. That is absolute, like,
Incorrect.
It was so hard. And I mean, like, it's funny because now that they have kids, they're like, I don't know how you did this. Like, I don't know how you did life. Like, you still worked, but, mindset is everything, for better or for worse. I believe, that God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. Sometimes I say I think that is to my own demise, but I do think that belief of like, I can get through this, stay positive, try to be the best person that you can be. Like, those were some of the mantras that I was saying a lot while I was going through the tough times.
Mm-hmm. And two, like having the, knowing yourself, like throughout everything that you've talked about, it's sort of like you have this ability to take a step back from even your own self in these situations and be like, what is a higher level view of what I want this path to be? Versus like, okay, this feels this way, so I'm going to go this way. It's like, okay, well, this is going to be really hard and terrible and awful, and I don't really want to do this. And I may kick and scream in my own bedroom for a little bit and lose my mind. But then I'm going to go and I'm going to make myself a cup of coffee and I'm going to put together some boxes and I'm just going to pack this up. And I might circle back and kick and scream for a little bit, but like,
yes,
oh,
that's exactly it. And that's exactly it. And even as I think about, it's funny because when I moved to Philly with the girls, I ended up there was a little bit of a like, tried to work things out with my ex again, but we ended up deciding, that we were not meant to be together forever. So I did end up getting divorced while I was in Philly. But then I'm in Philly and I had this other inflection point where I had 3 kids in grade school for the first time. So like my third oldest was in kindergarten. It was like kindergarten, 2nd grade, and 6th grade.
mm.
So middle school, right? And I did that as a single mom with no family. I had like a play auntie, but she was around like when I first moved to Philly, but then her daughter had kids. And so she was helping her daughter out, which I totally get. And so I just remember going through that and I felt emotionally like I had a really fantastic job that, allowed me to support the girls financially, and their dad still also, supported financially as well. But I just felt like the brunt of mothering, parenting. I don't say like moms can father. I'm like, I can only be the parent that I am. But I'm like, there definitely was something missing without having another human physically present. And even if I would date, it's not the same. It's never the same, I feel like, as having that bio parent there, at least in my experience. And so I said, I don't think I can do this. And that was like that next inflection point. I was in Philly and I found out my oldest daughter's dad was also in Philly at the time. He has a wife and kids, but he decided that for them, it was best for them to move and leave Philadelphia. And so I was like, so you guys are leaving Philly. So I'm literally going to be here with like 4 kids and no real support. And that was in like May, June. I figured that out. And I had a moment where my 3 older girls were with my mom on a cruise because she and my dad will like take the girls on vacation in the summer. And I just had my youngest. And I remember I was folding clothes and I was running her bath water. And she said, "Mommy, can you read me a book?" And I was like, "Sure, I'd love to read you a book." And I had an aha moment. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't dislike being a mom. I just don't have the mental space to show up in the best way possible as many times as I'd like. Like, because it was like, I got to the point where it was like, if my kids asked me anything, it was almost like I wasn't who I knew I should be.
Mm-hmm.
I was tired. I was stressed. I was just like, it's a wrap. No, I don't want to, mommy can't read you a book right now. Like, but I want to be the mom who can do those things, at least sometimes, you know? And so at that moment in June, I was like, I can't be here anymore. I need to be near my parents. It was one thing to be near friends, but it's another thing to have unpaid familial help that will show up when you need them to, that will physically be there, that can help be the village for these children when they're going to say, "You're not my dad," or "You're not my mom," to other people and friends that are around. Well, that's your grandma. So you can't say anything, you
Good
can't
luck.
say anything there. And so I decided then to move to Michigan. Thought my job would move with me, found out that my job did not move with me. So I moved to Michigan with no job at the time because I felt like that was the best thing for my family. So we ended up moving in with my parents. As we moved in with my parents, figured out a lot of things along the way. So I did a little stint of consulting, had my own business for about 10 months. Ulta Beauty was a client of mine while I was a consultant. And so that was like a full circle moment when they ended up hiring me full time, when the woman who hired me for that temporary role got promoted and said, "Hey, would you like my role full time?" But
that's awesome.
That in between was a really tough time because I was literally back in my parents' house with the rules that parents sometimes have. And it was tough because I felt like, man, I did all of these things. I have like an MBA. I have this, like, I'm supposed to be really smart, but I just felt like, then why am I here? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why was this the place that I needed to be? But, eventually things did work out, thankfully, but it was a tough time to be there. But I will also say it was the right move because my parents' ability to support me as a mother is not necessarily substituting for that second parent, because again, I think it still is different, but it provides me with the relief that I need to be able to go hang out with my girlfriends or just be in the house by myself and even if I have to do chores, I can crank my music and play whatever I want as loud as possible and know that my kids are being taken care of. It's not costing a fortune. And that has been so, so helpful.
I think that too, like what you were saying about when you're folding clothes and your daughter's getting ready to get in the bath, is that it's that idea of like, so much of the message that we receive is you have to enjoy this all the time. And there's never a time. You're either like, Mother Teresa, Cinderella, all of those things, or you're a hot mess who is ungrateful and doesn't like value family and doesn't blah, blah, blah. It's sort of like that really dark and stormy bucket of not goodness, but there's no middle. Right. And so if you always feel like, no, like grateful, got to be like feeling all these things. Yay. So happy to be here. Just, just happy to be part of the team versus like, I exist as a completely separate entity outside of the team. But in order for you to exist as a completely separate entity outside the team, you have to be able to step out of your role in that team.
Yes.
Because otherwise
you become a zombie. Mm-hmm. And like, I had no idea that the teenage years were going to be so tough. I'm reading a book called Untangled, which is like focused on teenage girls specifically and the things that they go through. And it's really helping me to not take things so personally. But I think that especially like just the emotional bandwidth that I had to support my oldest as a teenager was like, I need help because I don't feel like I have it in me. And
you need a manual.
Yeah.
You don't need a manual for a newborn. You need a manual for a teenager. Yeah.
I tell people I will take a newborn over these teenagers every day. And when people say, what? I'm like, it depends on the kid that you have. And it's not to say, I mean, my daughter is, from everything that I've read, she's just a typical teen, you know, and some are more challenging than others. And it just having like even my mom to be around to be like, I know it feels this way, but you got to remember, like, she loves you. She's going through her own things. And, you know, you kind of got to brush it off. You can't take it personally. But then I also still have to be like, hey, that wasn't nice. So you're not going to get to do this thing, because I don't want you to think that like you can be mean to people and they'll still do nice things for you, because that's not how the real world works.
Yeah.
But boy, is it hard to say that calm. Like after someone, it's like, you came for me, but it's like 13 or 12 or whatever that preteen age is, like, brain is not fully developed. And I mean, not to say that I'm like that every time, because I have my moments. But like you said, you know, it's a spectrum. Like Cinderella, you know, I don't want to say evil stepmother, but like, you know, sometimes we're not always on the Cinderella side.
But then also too, like you in order to get to, like, you know, the Mother Teresa end of the spectrum, what you need is space. And if you're running into the teenage years and you've been like fully in the deep end since, you know, you're the one wearing the diapers coming home from the hospital. Yeah. Right? Like, you're like, I've been literally doing this since you and I were in diapers together, and I'm still tired. And like, you know, the game keeps changing and I'm supposed to show up all the time, but I don't have a second to like take a breath and get some perspective. I think the like preteen teenage years, there has to be some sort of significant acknowledgement for parents, because I think what happens is like, you go into like, I will keep a newborn alive. I will feed a baby every 2 hours. I will like have my hair on sideways and, you know, not know what day it is or where I'm going. That's fine. That's physical survival. Yeah. Right? Like you and I have both had 4 kids. I can live on coffee, whatever gets scraped out of the bottom of the pantry, and like all of that stuff. I can do that.
Dinner.
Yeah. But the impact of that is I am keeping somebody alive. The impact of not being able to sit down and have that conversation where I'm like seeing you as a person and seeing you as a developing human and interacting with you in a way that is going to help you shape how you feel about yourself, how you feel about this problem, how you feel about the world. Like, the stakes are so flippin' high at that point in time. It's not even the same level.
It's not. And it's like, it's one of those things that it's hard to explain until you've been there. Like, when I talk to my girlfriends now who do have kids, the few close friends, they're like, have like a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and they'll hear my stories and they're like, oh gosh, like, I don't know. And I'm like,
my kid will never.
You know what? No, they're more so like, I'm hopeful, but they're kind of like, oh, this sounds like anything is possible. What I say to them is like, the little things that you see when they're whining, you're like, oh, that's so cute. Like, oh, they're kind of mischievous. Oh, they're kind of sneaky. Imagine sneaky at 13 with a cell phone, right? It looks different. And that's when you realize, oh, like I mean, I have the hindsight now to see, like, my child is not any different than who she's ever been. It just looks very different at this age with the desires that she has and all of those things. And so I think I had a little bit of rose-colored glasses, and now I can kind of like look at the other kids and be like, oh, I can see what that could potentially look like, and almost like prepare myself a little bit more. But with the first, it was just like, oh, what's going on?
All the mistakes get made on the first kid.
Yeah. Mistakes and learnings.
Yeah. But and I think that too, like the learning comes from wanting to improve. People can make mistakes. Like I feel like 2 generations ago, people made mistakes and they didn't care because they were all like, people are literally trying to survive, right? Or 3 generations ago, people are trying to survive.
Right.
Now we're all like going to survive. We're not like 18 generations ago where we're like hunting our own food. Like we're going to the grocery store.
Right.
Let's get perspective. Now the focus is on how do we have people go through life so that like the world is a better place. Yes, recycle. Yes, like all of that stuff. But like how do you raise a human so that their impact on the world is positive from their level? Not everyone's going out to like scrape all the trash out of the ocean. We need people to go out and like have this butterfly effect, ripple effect of like good, kind, gentle, generous, all of that.
Yes. Yes.
I feel like that's what we're focusing on. Like our generation is focusing on as parents.
Yeah, it's like, how can we raise kind humans who, something that Tabitha Brown says, she says, and if you aren't having a good day, don't go messing up anybody else's. Like that kind of thing. Like, I get you're not having a good day, but like, don't go and mess somebody else's day up because we don't want that. So that's kind of like the mantra. And I can see how that shows up, but I don't know. I just take it one day at a time. I try my best. I do feel like I have some really amazing humans, but I also know, they make their own choices. So there's that push and give, to mothering, especially as they get older and letting them like make their own mistakes, but then providing the boundaries. And so that's a fun learning for me, I'll say.
Yeah. You know what I think is interesting of all of the episodes that I've recorded so far, the Sheryl Sandberg book has come up more often than any other book in regards to feeling like you should be doing something, which ultimately leads to that's not possible. So that was one thing I wanted to point out is like, there are so many women who took that as like the manual for how you're supposed to do this. And then they got snowplowed in the face by the fact that like the actual physical lift that it takes to do all of the stuff at home, on top of all of the stuff at work, on top of all of those pieces, like, and then all of these women that get exalted, like the CEO of Yahoo who had a nursery in her office. Like, it's like those get pushed out as this incredible, like, dedication.
See, you can do it.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. One of one. So I think it's really interesting that how much this has happened and how much this has changed even in the last like 15 years for her.
Yeah. And Cheryl said it herself. She came out with another book and was like, I was wrong. I think when her husband passed, that's when she realized like, oh, this is different. I didn't think about all of these different scenarios. I take it back.
Like, that's great, Cheryl. Good job. Welcome to the rest of us. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so excited that like, I just think that the idea of not always being in a space of like, this is what I chose, so therefore I have to go all the way to the end of the line, and like pivoting and showing different examples of how like things can be really terrible in the moment, but that the greater mission is ultimately to get from here to here, and how you've like walked that way. So I think that's amazing.
Thank you. I'm hopeful that it's helpful to other folks. I know, especially for the type A high achievers, it can feel like I felt like a failure because I wasn't able to, I don't have a director title. I'm divorced, but I just had to realize like all of whoever said that was the goal, that was success. I don't know. That's just not the case necessarily for me, because if we're talking about happiness, if we're talking about being healthy, that doesn't always look like staying married to someone if that is not the best case for you, or living in a place when you thought it was going to be the right place, but you realize actually it's not. So I've just learned, like, sometimes you make a move and you think it's right and it's not. And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, the adjusting, but also acknowledging that you do need time to like kick and scream in your closet and then go make a cup of coffee and sort out where the next maneuver is.
Yes. With help.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, so tell everyone where they can find you and about your podcast and all the things.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, pretty much all the places at Monique H. Benoit. And then I have a podcast where I talk to retail industry experts, helping give early stage beauty brands tactical tips and tools to scale their brands from 0 to 20 million. So it's very on the business side of things, but it's called Scaling Emerging Beauty. And I have weekly episodes, all things retail and beauty.
I love it. And I want to have you come back and talk about this accelerator emerging brands piece and how that all links into your story. So I definitely want to have you come back in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Ashley.